The night she returned to London was heavy with rain, the kind that gleamed against cobblestones and blurred the lamplight into halos. 6 years had passed since Lady Evelyn Ashcombe had last set foot in the city, yet its pulse of gossip and grandeur beat, just as it always had, merciless, glittering, and watchful. Her carriage halted before the grand Langston residence, where hundreds of candles burned behind frost-flecked windows. Music drifted faintly through the walls, violins, laughter, the delicate rustle of silk. The season had begun, and London was alive with vanity. Inside, beneath chandeliers the color of gold wine, society's finest were gathered in their peacock hues. Men stood in crisp black coats, women shimmered in gowns that caught light like water. They had come for the Langston Ball, the first of the year, a place to be seen, remembered, and, above all, whispered about. As the great clock struck 9, a murmur rippled through the ballroom, soft as wind across glass. A name once buried had returned to the air, Lady Evelyn Ashcombe. She stepped into the entryway, her gloved hand resting briefly against the marble banister as if to steady her heart. Her gown was pale gray, the shade of morning mist, too subdued for the season's taste but perfectly suited to a woman who had lived among shadows. 6 years of isolation in her late father's country estate had stripped her of girlish vanity. What remained was poise, elegant, fragile, hard-earned. Yet even now, the weight of memory pressed upon her shoulders. The night she had last danced in this city had ended in tragedy. Her fiancé, Lord Edmund Harcourt, found dead by the river before dawn. She had not spoken publicly since. At the threshold, her arrival was announced not by name, but by silence. The footman hesitated, glancing uncertainly toward his mistress, Lady Langston, who offered the smallest, cruelest nod. The orchestra faltered for half a breath. Then, conversation resumed, low, cautious, poisonous. Evelyn inhaled, lifted her chin, and crossed the threshold alone. Her first step onto the marble floor was met with stares. Every whisper, every shifting glance seemed to weigh her down like lead. The air itself turned brittle with memory. Once, she had been admired for her beauty, her wit, her charm. Now she was a story, half tragic, half scandalous, revived for another telling. "She looks older," someone murmured. "Exile hardens the face," another replied. "Or guilt does," said a third. Evelyn heard none of it, and yet she felt every syllable. She moved through the crowd with the careful grace of a woman walking a blade's edge. Each nod was rehearsed, each smile measured. Her family's fortune was gone, their names salvaged only by her quiet disappearance years ago. Tonight was her attempt at resurrection, though she knew London society was a graveyard for second chances. Then she saw him. At the far end of the ballroom, framed by columns of pale marble, stood the Duke of Ravenscar. He had not changed, and yet he had become something more formidable, more distant. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the severe elegance of black and silver, he looked as though he had been carved from restraint itself. His gaze found hers across the crowded room, unwavering. He had been Edmund's dearest friend, the only man who had defended her when suspicion first fell. After Edmund's death, he had vanished from her world, taking with him the last thread of comfort she had known. And now, after 6 years, his eyes met hers with an intensity that unsettled the fragile calm she had built within herself. Evelyn forced her breath steady. She turned slightly, pretending interest in a conversation she could not hear. Yet every part of her was aware of him, the slow, deliberate way he began to move through the crowd, the murmur that followed in his wake. She had imagined this meeting 100 times, though never here, beneath chandeliers that had witnessed her ruin. Lady Langston approached, her smile sharp as glass. "How brave of you to return, Lady Ashcombe. London is not as forgiving as the countryside, I fear." Evelyn met her gaze calmly. "Nor as forgetful," she said softly. A flicker of irritation crossed the woman's painted face, but before she could reply, a hush spread across the ballroom. The Duke of Ravenscar had reached them. Conversation dimmed like candlelight before a gust. Every glance turned to watch. He bowed with impeccable precision, his voice smooth, low, carrying a gravity that silenced even the cruelest tongues. "Lady Evelyn Ashcombe," he said, his gaze locked on hers. "I believe this dance is mine." The orchestra seemed to hesitate, then resumed, strings trembling into a slow waltz. The gesture was a defiance, a declaration. To dance with her was to defy London's judgment, to be seen with her was to risk his own immaculate reputation. Yet he extended his hand, waiting. For one breath, Evelyn could not move. 1,000 memories unfurled, the laughter of another man long dead, the taste of tears, the echo of vows never spoken. But there, before her, was the Duke, steady, unwavering, offering her not salvation but choice. Her gloved hand trembled as she placed it in his. The room exhaled, scandalized, enthralled. They stepped into the dance. The music carried them across the floor, graceful as ghosts. The scent of lilies, perfume, and wax filled the air. No one dared interrupt. Her gown whispered against the marble. His hand rested at her waist, respectful yet impossibly close. "You should not have done that," she murmured. "I am quite certain I should," he replied. She lifted her gaze, startled by the warmth beneath his composure. For the briefest instant the years between them dissolved, and she saw not the Duke, but the man who had once stood beside her at Edmund's funeral, rain pouring, his gloves soaked, his silence breaking only once, to promise her she would not be alone. "London will talk," she said quietly. "London always talks," he answered. "But I have grown tired of silence." They turned, the chandeliers catching in her hair like scattered light. Around them, the watchers whispered anew. Some pitied her, some admired her audacity. None understood the language that passed between their glances. When the waltz ended, he released her hand with the same deliberate grace with which he had taken it. The room erupted in murmured speculation, but neither looked away. Evelyn's composure returned like armor. "Why?" she asked softly, her voice meant only for him. "After all these years?" He regarded her for a moment, his expression unreadable, though his eyes betrayed a tenderness she had not seen since before the tragedy. "Because," he said, his tone low and steady, "you have been condemned long enough." The words struck her harder than she expected. There was no pity in them, only truth. He bowed once more and stepped back, giving her space, though the warmth of his hand still lingered on her skin. Around them, the orchestra began another tune, brighter, louder, as if to bury the tension they had left behind. Yet the whispers grew like vines through the room. Evelyn turned, her pulse unsteady, her breath quickened. The Duke was already walking away, disappearing into the shimmer of the crowd. For the first time in 6 years, her name had been spoken not as a stain, but as a lady's once more. Still, she knew what such defiance would cost him, and her. Society forgave neither love nor loyalty when scandal was its prey. But beneath the music and the murmurs, a thought took root, fragile yet alive. Perhaps her story was not yet finished. In the days that followed the Langston ball, London could speak of nothing but Lady Evelyn Ashcombe and the Duke of Ravenscar. The scandal of their waltz had rippled through parlors, drawing-rooms, and gentlemen's clubs like perfume spilled on silk, sweet, intoxicating, and impossible to contain. Some called it chivalry, others called it folly. Yet all agreed on one thing. For a man of Ravenscar's standing to so openly align himself with a woman branded by tragedy was either the height of nobility or the first step toward ruin. Evelyn, confined to her modest townhouse on Grosvenor Street, tried to ignore the whispers that reached even her quiet parlor. Each morning, the post arrived heavy with unsigned notes, some mocking, others pitying, a few cruel enough to draw tears she refused to shed. She spent her hours by the window, embroidering to still her hands, telling herself the city's attention would soon turn elsewhere. It never did. The Duke had made her visible again, and visibility in London was as dangerous as fire. One grey afternoon, her maid entered with a small velvet box, sealed with a wax crest she recognized instantly. The Ravenscar crest, silver wings crossed by a sword. Her fingers hesitated before breaking the seal. Inside lay a brooch shaped like a violet, its enamel petals delicate, luminous. A single line accompanied it, written in his precise hand: "For remembrance. Wear it if you have not forgotten who you were." The gift was at once tender and perilous. A token from a duke to a disgraced woman could ignite another round of whispers. Yet Evelyn understood its meaning. Violets had adorned her hair the night her fiancé died, the night she had last seen both men alive. She clasped the brooch in her palm and felt her composure tremble. He remembered. When she next ventured into society, the reaction was swift. She wore the violet pinned discreetly at her collar during a morning promenade in Hyde Park. The sun hid behind a veil of clouds. Carriages rolled slowly past, their occupants pretending not to stare. A pair of women, seated near the lake, exchanged murmured remarks loud enough to be heard. "How shameless to wear lavender after what happened. She seeks sympathy, no doubt. The Duke's pity has made her bold." Evelyn continued walking, her posture impeccable though her pulse raced. The familiar ache of humiliation returned, bitter and sharp. She turned toward her carriage, desperate to escape the scrutiny, when a figure appeared beside her, matching her pace with effortless grace. The Duke of Ravenscar, dressed in dark riding attire, carried a closed umbrella though the air held no rain. "Good afternoon, Lady Ashcombe," he said calmly. "You should not approach me here," she replied without meeting his eyes. "They are already speaking." "They will speak regardless," he said, his tone steady. "I thought it better to give them something worth repeating." She almost smiled despite herself. "Your sense of gallantry borders on recklessness. Perhaps. But I have never been fond of half measures." He offered his arm. For a moment she hesitated, torn between caution and an unspoken longing for the steadiness his presence brought. At last she took it. Together they walked the length of the path, every gaze upon them, every whisper amplified by curiosity. As they neared the bridge, Ravenscar spoke more softly. "You think me foolish for drawing attention to you again." "I think you kind," she answered, "and kindness can be dangerous in this city." "Then I shall risk it," he said. "You endured 6 years of silence while others traded your name like currency. Allow me the courtesy of one afternoon without hiding." They paused at the water's edge. The reflection of clouds drifted across the lake like passing ghosts. For the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself to breathe without the weight of shame. "I sometimes wonder," she said quietly, "if London will ever let me exist without remembering him." Ravenscar's gaze softened. "You forget that I, too, remember him." She turned sharply. "Then why do this? Why bring back the past?" "Because the past is already here," he replied. "And I would rather face it beside you than watch you face it alone." Their eyes met, and something fragile stirred between them, a recognition neither dared name. Before she could answer, a rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. He opened his umbrella with a practiced flick, holding it above them as the first drops began to fall. The image was simple, yet to those watching from their carriages, it was scandal incarnate. A duke sheltering a disgraced woman in the rain, his gloved hand steady above her as though the world itself had no claim on their moment. When they reached her carriage, he bowed with formality. "I trust the violet suited you." "It is beautiful," she said, voice low. "But you must not send me such things again." He inclined his head, a faint smile curving his lips. "Then I must hope you treasure this one for a long while." The carriage door closed, leaving her to the echo of his words. She pressed her fingers to the brooch, feeling both warmth and unease. What had begun as an act of courtesy was becoming something perilously close to affection. By the following week, gossip had evolved into accusation. Rumors circulated that Ravenscar's loyalty masked something more intimate. Invitations once extended to Evelyn were quietly withdrawn. Even her cousin, Lady Margaret, advised her to leave the city again before further damage was done. But Evelyn refused. She would not flee twice. One evening, as she sat by the fire, her maid brought her an envelope, heavy, sealed in black wax. No sender's name. The seal bore an emblem she had not seen since Edmund's memorial, a raven with a broken wing. Her pulse quickened as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting unfamiliar, the message brief. You dance with the man who knows the truth. Ask him about the river. The words blurred before her eyes. She stood too quickly, nearly upsetting the chair behind her. For a moment the room seemed to spin, the fire, the shadows, the faint tick of the mantel clock all merging into one disorienting hum. The man who knows the truth. It could only mean Ravenscar. He had been there the night Edmund died, one of the last to see him alive. Yet he had never spoken of it beyond what was required. Had he kept something from her? Protected her, or concealed something darker? Sleep eluded her that night. She paced her chamber, torn between disbelief and dread. Every kindness he had shown her, every lingering look, now carried a question she could not silence. By dawn, she had resolved to confront him, though the thought filled her with fear. Outside, the city stirred to life, indifferent to the storm within her. She drew the curtains and watched the first carriages roll past in the pale morning light. Somewhere in that endless sprawl of streets and smoke, the Duke of Ravenscar was beginning his day, unaware, or perhaps entirely aware, that the fragile trust between them now trembled on the edge of revelation. She looked down at the violet brooch on her collar, its petals glinting faintly in the firelight, and wondered if it had been sent as a promise, or a warning. The letter haunted her for 2 days before she gathered the courage to confront him. Each hour that passed seemed to widen the distance between what she believed of him and what she feared might be true. When the second evening came, dark and heavy with the scent of rain, Evelyn found herself standing before Ravenscar's townhouse. Gaslight flickered against the wet cobblestones, and the knocker felt cold in her hand. A footman admitted her without question, as though her arrival had been expected. She was led through a corridor lined with portraits, ancestral faces staring down in judgment, and into a study where firelight cast long, trembling shadows across the paneled walls. The Duke stood near the hearth, his coat unbuttoned, his expression unreadable. He bowed slightly, but his eyes betrayed a weariness that startled her. "Lady Ashcombe," he said softly, "you come late." "I come with questions," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. He gestured toward the fire. "Then ask them, and I will answer, if I can." For a long moment neither spoke. The sound of the rain filled the silence, tapping against the windows like distant footsteps. Finally, she drew the letter from her reticule and held it out. "This was delivered to my house," she said. "It claims you know the truth of Edmund's death, that there was more to that night than you told." He took the letter without flinching, glanced at the writing, then placed it on the desk beside him. "And you believe it?" "I do not know what to believe," she admitted. "But I have lived 6 years under suspicion. If there is something you know, something you concealed, I must hear it from you." He turned toward the fire, his face half in shadow. For a moment she thought he would refuse to speak. Then, with quiet finality, he said, "Yes. There are things I did not tell you." Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because the truth, Evelyn, was a burden I feared you could not bear. And perhaps I was too much a coward to bear it myself." She stepped closer, her hands clenched at her sides. "Then tell me now. I have borne every cruelty this city could give. I can bear one more truth." He looked up at her then, and for the first time in all their years of acquaintance, she saw the mask of composure falter. "Edmund did not fall into the river by mischance," he said. "He was not drunk nor reckless. He was challenged, cornered by a man he owed a debt to. A duel unrecorded, unspoken of. I arrived too late to stop it." The word struck her like a blow. A duel? For what reason? Money, reputation, honor, perhaps, and jealousy. His voice hardened. There were rumors that he had gambled away his inheritance, and in his desperation, borrowed from men best left unmentioned. When one of them came to collect, pride demanded he answer the insult as a gentleman. But the man he faced was no gentleman. Evelyn's pulse quickened. "And you knew this all along?" "I suspected it. Later, I confirmed it." He reached for a small box on the desk and opened it. Inside lay a folded, yellowing letter, stained by age and what looked like water, perhaps something darker. He handed it to her. "I found this among his belongings the night he died. Read it." Her hands trembled as she unfolded the page. The writing was Edmund's, elegant, impatient, unmistakable. "If I do not return, it is not Evelyn's doing. She is innocent of my sins. I have chosen my end." The words blurred before her eyes. She lowered the paper slowly. "You kept this from me?" "Yes." His voice was low, filled with regret. "I feared what it might do to you, to know he had chosen death rather than face disgrace. You were already condemned by rumor. I thought it better that the truth die with him." Evelyn turned away, gripping the mantel to steady herself. The fire's warmth felt cruel against her skin. "You let me suffer the blame for his death. You let me believe I had failed him." "I tried to shield you," he said quietly. "I thought silence the kinder act. Kindness." She faced him, her eyes bright with fury and grief. "Do you know what silence cost me? 6 years of exile. 6 years of being whispered about, pitted, despised. You could have ended it with a word." He took a step closer, his own restraint breaking. "And what then? You would have been pitted not for scandal, but for having loved a man who chose death over life. Society would have devoured you all the same. I kept his secret because I swore to protect what was left of you." His words softened, heavy with unspoken affection. "And because I could not bear to see you weep again." The anger in her faltered, replaced by something more fragile. "You loved him," she said quietly. "I did," he admitted. "He was like a brother to me. But he paused, searching for words that would not wound. "I loved you differently." The confession hung between them, perilous as a flame. Evelyn's breath caught. All these years," he said, "I have tried to forget. I failed. Every time I saw your name in the scandal sheets, every time I passed the river, I remembered the sound of your voice that night, the way you called his name in the dark." Her eyes filled with tears she could no longer contain. "And yet you let me live as a ghost." "I thought myself noble for it," he said bitterly. "Perhaps I was merely a coward in finer clothing." The rain outside had grown heavier, drumming against the windows with restless insistence. The fire crackled low, casting their faces in uneven light. Evelyn folded the letter again, holding it as though it might dissolve if released. "What would you have me do with this truth now?" she asked. "Whatever brings you peace," he replied. "If that means revealing it to the world, do so. I will stand beside you." She shook her head. "You risk too much for a woman whose name brings you nothing but scandal." He smiled faintly. "I have risked nothing worth keeping. Reputation fades. What remains, what has always remained, is you." The words undid her more completely than anger could have. She looked away, unable to speak. He crossed the distance between them, stopping just short of touching her. "I know what I have done cannot be undone," he said softly. "But if you can forgive me, even a little, then perhaps these 6 years will not have been wasted entirely." Evelyn met his gaze, searching it for deceit and finding only sorrow. "Forgiveness is not so simple," she whispered. "No," he said. "But neither is love." For a long time they stood in silence, the fire burning low between them. Then, slowly, she placed the letter on the desk beside his. "Keep it," she said. "If the truth must be spoken, let it come from you." He bowed his head, the faintest breath of relief escaping him. "You have my word." When she turned to leave, he stopped her with a single question, quiet but firm. "Evelyn, will you come to the winter ball? Her Majesty will be present. It may be your only chance to stand before those who wronged you." She hesitated at the doorway. And if I do? Then let the truth be spoken where it can no longer be ignored. Their eyes met one last time, the flicker of the fire between them like a promise yet unfulfilled. She stepped into the corridor without another word, the letter's echo still alive in her mind. Outside, the rain had ceased, leaving the streets washed clean. Yet she knew the night had changed everything. Whatever happened at the winter ball, she could never return to silence again. Rain swept across London like a benediction and a curse, washing the soot from the cobblestones and blurring the lamps into trembling stars. In the Duke of Ravenscar's study, firelight danced across old portraits, faces that had seen too many secrets, and in its glow stood Evelyn, her gloved hands trembling around the single letter that had changed everything. The night's earlier events, the confrontation, the whispered apologies, the truth of William's death laid bare, had left her hollow and trembling. Yet here she stood, summoned by the man whose voice still haunted her dreams. The Duke, Alexander, turned from the window as thunder rolled in the distance. He looked worn, no longer the immaculate figure of society's envy, but a man stripped of pretense. His cravat hung loose, his eyes shadowed by years of regret. "You shouldn't have come," he murmured, though his voice betrayed relief. "They're saying dreadful things already. You've given them more to feast upon." Evelyn's chin lifted, the faintest quiver of defiance in her poise. "They've feasted for years," she replied. "Let them choke on the truth now." Her words cut through the silence like glass. He stared at her for a long moment, as if memorizing the face he had not dared to love. "You don't know what truth costs, Evelyn," he said quietly. "It doesn't free you. It binds you to what you wish to forget." "I've lived bound already," she whispered. "Bound to their whispers, to his memory, to your silence." Alexander stepped closer, his voice trembling with the restraint of a man too long starved of honesty. "Do you think I did not ache to defend you? They would have destroyed you completely had I spoken then. You were fragile, heartbroken. I thought to protect you. By abandoning me?" The question escaped her lips before pride could stop it. "By watching as they called me murderess, as they erased my name from every guest list, every whisper of polite company?" His jaw tightened, shame flashing in his eyes. "Yes," he said, voice raw. "Because my presence would have damned you further. They would have said I shielded you out of guilt. I thought time would silence them. I was wrong." The room felt smaller then, the storm outside matching the tempest within. Evelyn turned from him, staring into the flames that crackled with restless hunger. "And now," she asked, "why call me here? To tell me you're sorry? To close the wound that never healed?" He moved closer, each step slow, deliberate, like a confession written in motion. "Because I cannot bear the distance any longer," he said. "Because I know now what I should have known then, that I loved you, even when it was forbidden to feel so." Her breath caught. The fire hissed softly, as though the world itself listened. "You loved me?" she repeated, disbelief and yearning intertwined. He nodded once, eyes unflinching. "From the first moment I saw you, standing beneath the chandeliers in your pale blue gown. I envied William then, but I swore I would never let it show. When he died, I swore again that I would never dishonor his memory by speaking what burned in me. But silence has a way of becoming cruelty." Evelyn's heart twisted, torn between fury and compassion. "And you think this declaration, can undo the years of ruin? My reputation, my exile, my mother's tears?" "No," he said simply. "But perhaps it can end the lie we've both been living. Perhaps we can face what remains together." Her eyes glistened with unspent tears. "You speak of facing it together, but you live in a world that would never forgive us. You're the Duke of Ravenscar, and I." "You are Lady Evelyn Ashcombe," he interrupted, stepping forward until only a breath separated them. "You are the woman who never cowered beneath their cruelty, who bore disgrace with dignity. I would rather be damned beside you than adored without you." His voice shook now, stripped of the control that had once defined him. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm's fury outside seemed gentler than the quiet between them. Evelyn's hand trembled as she reached for the mantle, steadying herself. "I don't know if I can trust you," she confessed softly. "You stood silent when I needed you most." "I know," he said. "And if forgiveness is beyond reach, then let me at least be your shield now. The truth is out, the letters, the debt, the man who blackmailed William. The world will know you innocent. Let me ensure they never again twist your name." She turned to him fully then, eyes luminous in the firelight. "And when they twist yours for standing by me?" He smiled faintly, a ghost of his former arrogance softened by love. "Let them. They've whispered my name for far less noble reasons before." A fragile laugh escaped her, the sound like a note of spring after a cruel winter. But then, as thunder cracked again, the tension returned. "If I stay," she said, "if I accept your protection, they will say I've trapped you, manipulated you with scandal." He reached out, his fingers brushing hers, light, reverent, a vow in touch. "Then let them say what they will. I have lived too long by their approval. Tonight, I choose truth over reputation." For a long while, neither moved. The fire burned low, and rain streaked the windows in silver ribbons. Finally, she drew a breath that trembled with decision. "Then tell me, Alexander," she whispered, "what truth do you wish to live by?" He took her hand fully now, no hesitation. "That I love you, that I always have, and that, if the world will not grant you a place, I shall make one beside me." Her tears fell freely then, not from despair, but release. "And what of duty? Of your title, your house?" "I have fulfilled duty all my life," he said. "But duty without heart is but a gilded cage. I will not let them cage us again." In that moment, something within her, something buried beneath years of caution and fear, broke open. She stepped closer, her forehead resting against his. "You waited 6 years," she whispered. "I would have waited 60, he replied. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle, the dawn beginning to hint on the horizon. The scandal that had torn them apart was already fading into rumor and fatigue. What would come next was uncertain, perhaps exile again, perhaps defiance, but neither feared it now. When Evelyn finally spoke, her voice was a breath of promise. "Then let it be known," she said, "that Lady Evelyn Ashcombe will not hide any longer. If the world must watch, let them see the truth of what love can endure." He drew her hand to his lips, a solemn benediction. "Then let the dawn bear witness," he murmured. And as the first light spilled into the chamber, catching on the wet glass and flickering flame, it seemed as though all of London held its breath, for the return of a woman once broken, and the vow of a man who would rather face ruin than live another day without her.